Hello and welcome to the Scuttlebutt Podcast. I'm your host, Briggs, and today I'm speaking with Sergeant Major Don Reynolds. This conversation revolves primarily around the past, present, and future culture of the Marine Corps. We talk about what makes the perfect Marine and dissect a branch of the military that draws in people looking to be warriors. One of the bigger questions I've wrestled with during my time in and even since getting out is how you balance the chest bumping alpha culture the military has. Don had a great response to that. And he says, a healthy dose of imposter syndrome, normally something talked about very negatively, but he pitches as a counterweight to a big ego. We talked through a few other interesting topics: how to discipline and lead a new generation of Marines with faster feedback loops. And one I have not been able to stop thinking about since we ended our conversation over a week ago. And that's understanding what you want to be measured against in life. One of my favorite quotes from Don said, "The Marine Corps has been a bubble where my worth to the team was based solely around how fast I could move, how far I could ruck, and how well I could shoot." To some people, that sounds horrific. To others, it sounds incredibly simplistic and fulfilling. Don may have been in 22 years, but has yet to take his finger off the pulse of what inspires, motivates, and drives our country's largest lethal fighting force. You're in for a treat today with a high quality Marine and human being. Enjoy this conversation with Don Reynolds. Don, thank you so much for taking time to chat with me today. I really try to do some deep diving and backstory on each person that I have on the show. And from my reading of you, everything that you've written, and everything that I just see, I don't know that I've come across like more of like almost the perfect Marine than you. The way that you talk really is so aligned with everything that I know that the Marine Corps talks about, and I that wasn't my branch, but just from what I've perceived over time, it really appears to me optically that that is you. Like you guys are one and the same. Would you say that that's true?
Uh, I think I wouldn't say that. I know that everything that I write and everything that I say has come from a place where I've either made that mistake and learned that lesson the hard way. So you're getting a perspective that maybe I didn't have early on that I learned. So no, I mean I wouldn't say that I'm the perfect Marine in any regards. I make a lot of mistakes, and I know a lot of Marines that in my eyes are the perfect Marines, and you're always struggling to try to, fit that image. But I try as hard as I can to represent the Marine Corps the right way, and exemplify the things that they want to see, and, that we advertise to the world. But I'm a work in progress, just like everybody else.
I think that that humility is part of what kind of puts the stamp on that for me. It's like, yeah, this is who I am, and this is who I'm kind of striving to be, and I think that that's a powerful message and life to live, and I think sets a unbelievable example for the Marine Corps to. I don't know. You're now in a recruiting position, correct?
I am. I mean, you got to think about our culture, right? So our culture has so many levels of Marines doing incredible things, or just on a daily basis. So for anybody, I come from the era where you could walk into the PX and see a Lance Corporal with double awarded Purple Heart, or I come from the era where you would read in the back of Leatherneck magazine a corporal receiving the Navy Cross. So I never will ever put my service out there or the things that I've done as like a benchmark for being perfection, or look at me, look what I've done, because I'm reminded every day, and our service reminds us every day, kind of like there are people out there that are, you better be wary of advertising yourself as being the best or the baddest or the toughest or the roughest or having seen the most, so it's just something that I stay conscious of, because there's probably a kid right now that's there are kids right now that are smarter than me, faster than me, can process information quicker than me, know their tactics better than me. So I just try to fill my role.
What do you think about it? The military culture. I won't even just like put this just on the Marine Corps. I know that it's probably a little bit more so there, just from my little knowledge of it. But what do you think it is about the military that really promotes that type of thinking where it's this kind of a competition of like who's done the most deployments, who's got the most ribbons? It's just kind of this kind of like angry pissing contest in a lot of ways.
Because I think that I'll speak about the Marine Corps. I think that there is something about the Marine Corps and our culture that draws alphas. And when I say alphas, there's alpha females, there's alpha males, just that type A type of aggressive personality that wants to be challenged. And then when you are challenged and you meet that challenge and you're proud of meeting that challenge, then of course there's that self promotion of where you're going to aggressively now talk about how you met that challenge. And in our culture, we talk about the old core and the new core, and there's a joke in the Marine Corps about the old core is whatever took place the day before you showed up. So in the Marine, you will hear a guy that's been in the Marine Corps like 1 year longer than you talk about, oh, you should have been here last year. Last year was really, the second you showed up, that's when the standards started dropping. Like you don't know, like back in 2020. So it's peculiar, but I think it's a lot of times at the root of it, at the heart of it, it's just a tremendous amount of pride in the type of life that you live, the challenges that you face. So and that kind of manifests itself into a lot of chest thumping, a lot of trash talking, and it can 90% of the time it's a good thing. But it's kind of this weird thing right now where I've noticed a lot of people that kind of, I don't know, for lack of a better term, they kind of like slag other people's service. So you'll have a guy that served during wartime kind of slag the new generation of Marines. Or I get it all the time. You get guys that served in previous generations of Marines that call today's Marines soft and stuff like that. I think that's always been the thing, but I think that it all comes from a place where you're just everybody is tremendously proud of what they've accomplished, what they've been through, because that's what we advertise to the world, right? We're going to challenge you. The Marine Corps is something different. Like if you're looking, we don't offer you much except a rifle and a hard time, right? And you're going to come out the other end disciplined, and a better person. So I think that's kind of where our culture comes from.
I told myself in while I was in, I remember standing there in it was a C school that I was attending, and my course was being taught by these older civilian 20-year Navy chiefs and whatever who got out and didn't fall far from the tree. They're at the schoolhouse teaching, and they're sitting there like giving us all this shit about how weak it is now and all of this stuff, how it would never that never would have happened, in our Navy and all this stuff. And I told myself, I was like, I will never do that because I can already tell there was the feeling like by the time I was getting out to be doing that, it was like, oh, you should say this because it has changed. But I told myself I'd never do that. What do you think is the recipe for balancing that kind of competitive nature that drives us forward and kind of, pulls each other and boosts each other up, but also kind of brings in that humility element that you're talking about?
I think you need to understand that, as far as the military is concerned, if you have to rely on, past greatness or, stories from the past to make yourself relevant now, then that's a problem, right? So my wife was talking to me about this like last year. She was talking about imposter syndrome, right? So it's where you kind of step into a position or you step into a unit and you kind of feel very, very self-aware, like, do I have what it takes to be here? Am I qualified? Am I this? Am I that? I think that that's a good mindset to have because that's going to keep you honest and that's going to keep you hungry every day, right? So yes, you should absolutely be proud of the accomplishments and the achievements that you've gotten during your time in service. But every time you step into a billet, every new day, the past doesn't matter. It's all about what you've done today. So a lot of good can come with it. I mean, if you talk about beating your chest and talking about the accomplishments of the past, that's great. If you can leverage that experience from the past into something relevant today for, your troops or the people underneath of you to learn from and effectively, assist them in the mission in the here and now. That's what I think. I think that no one wants to hear. I was talking to my boss a while ago, and it dawned on me. No one wants to hear the Marines now, if you were to bring a combat reference about Iraq to the Marines now, that would have been like someone talking to me about Beirut when I was a young Marine, right? You can't even visualize what that person's talking about, right? So it's like, let's move away from this one time in Fallujah, and start talking about how, yeah, here's where you've been, here's what you've done. What can you do for me today? How can you influence the next generation of Marines, right? What do you contribute to the unit now? What are you bringing to the table? And I think that that's probably the best way to balance it, right? Because you will, there's some experiences that you just accrue in the Marine Corps that will absolutely help you in future endeavors, right? But that can't be the end all be all. And the crux of your existence is, you should have seen me 10 years ago when I was the squad leader in, Afghanistan. Well, that's not really what the Marines really need to see right now. What they want to see is a sergeant major in 2022 that is there for them, and that, is relevant and looking out for them and taking care of them and teaching them the things that they need to know in order to be successful today.
Talking in like the same vein of like measuring and like how Marines and like I guess military members are valued generally. You had a post that I really like. We're going to talk a lot about your posts. I love your Instagram feed. You've curated a really great stream of writing and encouraging kind of mottos and mantras that I think people really cling to. So I'm going to make several references to those, and I'll be sure to include people can check that out for later. But this one post specifically, you said the Marine Corps has been a bubble where my worth to the team was based solely around how fast I could move, how far I could ruck, and how well I could shoot. To some people, that sounds horrific. To others, it sounds incredibly simplistic and fulfilling. Originally, I was like waiting for you to kind of start the next paragraph talking about how you're so much more than like just a rucker or like a shooter or all of these things, and you're just like, no, like that's enough for me. That was so like contrarian, I guess, to a lot of the posts and stuff that you hear people talk about. They want to be seen as like more than a uniform now, but that is enough for you. Can you maybe kind of unpack that a little bit?
Yeah, a little bit. So I write everything. This Instagram I was on recruiting, and I was at a recruiting event, and one of my recruiters was taking a video, and I was like, "What are you going to do with this video?" And she said, "I'm going to put it on Instagram." I didn't even have an Instagram account. So one of my jobs is to kind of make sure that recruiters are effectively using social media, you know what I mean? Or because we have a pool program, kids that are waiting to go to boot camp, right? And, kind of advertising the events that the Marines are doing, promotes the service and gets the message out there. So I thought it would probably be a good look to set up an Instagram account. So I started doing what a lot of people do, which is I was just taking pictures of recruiting events. My wife is a little bit more savvy towards social media. So she was like, stop. She's like, don't your post. She basically said, she was like, your posts, right? So she's
A little
like,
bit cringy.
yeah, she was like, so if I were you, you know, one, why don't you talk about aspects of your career? That might be more interesting. Number two is I would like for you to do that because my wife knows very little about my, military service. It's not something that I don't sit around the house and, tell war stories to my wife and kids. And I didn't get married until I was 30 years old. So a lot of the stuff that I talk about took place, or, combat experience, whatever, took place long before I ever met my wife. So she was like, number two, she can be like, it could kind of be like like I could keep it, maybe, like reference, whatever. It could be like a log, that I could, maybe your kids one day would like to look at, right? Like I said before, I only speak about things I know about. I'm a very junior sergeant major. And in the Marine Corps, you can do all the way up until you're a sergeant major. You will spend your time at the company level dealing with, 150 guys, small unit level. So I only speak about the things I know about. So with that context, all my posts kind of are geared towards I want the young Marine, like a kid that's, in the barracks at Camp Pendleton, to wake up in the morning and maybe read something I wrote, and that might motivate him to attack his duties that day. You know what I mean? Or maybe if someone that's demotivated or kind of questioning, like, why do I even do this? Maybe read something that I write and it kind of puts it all in perspective. So, but at the root of it all, yes, that's how I feel. At the root of it all, no matter what rank you go into the Marine Corps, right? All the accomplishments, all the achievements, you're still expected to show and prove every single day, right? So I may be a unit sergeant major. If I go out and booger the rifle range, it's going to be big news, right? Because you have to be proficient, right? If I go out on a run and fall out of a run, big news, because you've got to be physically fit. If we go on a unit hike and I can't carry my load from point A to point B and got to get in the truck, big news, because I'm the sergeant major. So at the crux of it all, especially as a young Marine, when you think about all the things that in the civilian world that someone that's 21, 22, 23 has to worry about, whether it's getting a job or classes or this, that, whatever, the average Marine in the infantry right now, he's got to worry about those three things: how fast can you move, how far can you ruck, and how well can you shoot. It's incredibly simplistic. I used to sleep very, very well at night knowing that my worth was was measured in those three things right then and there. Right, hey, here's what I got to do. Like, it's very, very clear, very, very tangible. There's not a whole lot of worry. That's my existence. That's my contribution to the team. I found it simplistic and fulfilling. Some people may say, you know, if they're going to summarize your worth based on these three things, that sounds terrible. Hey, to each their own. This lifestyle doesn't appeal to everybody, but for me, and I think a lot of people, that's pretty refreshing, right? Because every single day when you step in the door, you know where you stand.
You said that you used to sleep well at night. Have the shooting scores and the rucking distances, have those kind of come down a little bit from the junior days?
Absolutely not, bro. I still max mine, and I'm 40 years old. I still do all that stuff. Well, because now I have a family. So, balancing family in the military, right? Your life is obviously more complex than what it was when I was just a young Marine serving in an infantry battalion, you know, somewhere across the world, right?
I think that you make a really good point there. And I think that there's a larger conversation to be had. We don't have to get too far into it, but around choosing the things that you want to be measured on. And if you, like you're saying, if you're content with these are the three things, then, like you said, there's no question about where you are. Everybody in those, I'm guessing in those units, they know, hey, this guy, he shoots the best of all of us. And they wake up knowing that he's the best until the next time you shoot or whatever. And I think that the people that are talking about wanting to be valued and kind of measured against different objectives than what the military brings and the standards that they require, they probably don't belong there, to be honest.
Take a step back even further and just say, like, take away the shooting and the rucking and the physical performance that I was talking about specifically, and just say, you know, it may not even be the military, but like in a world where kind of people are very passive aggressive or don't necessarily say what they mean, and you're left to wonder kind of like, what do they really think about me? It for me, I found it very refreshing to step into an organization and know exactly where I stood, and what people thought about me, based upon a very tangible performance metric. And then the other part about it is this: is for me personally, I joined the Marine Corps. I was a very troubled youth, right? I was like, I'd been in a detention center for briefly, had a problem with getting into fights. I had rebelled against my parents. And when I stepped into this institution where, I was a machine gunner with 3rd Battalion, 2nd Marines, and you have these Marines that are just, your leadership, like your platoon sergeants. And these guys are just the picture of physical fitness and discipline and, all the things that they exemplify the Marine Corps that your drill instructor taught you about, right? And they have these exacting standards. And, to have one of them walk up to you when you're 18 years old and like pat you on the back and say, good job, because their praise was, they dished out praise, like, very, very sparingly. But to have one of them look you in the eye and say, like, hey, great job, Marine, or like, hey, you're doing a great job. I mean, that would just put you on cloud nine, right? You're getting praise from these people that, in your head exemplify everything that you want to be. So, I mean, for me, that was the Marine Corps. And that was like an institution that I really was drawn to. But, for other people, it could be something else. But I just think at the root of it all, it's really great to be a part of anything where you know where you stand. You know what I mean? You know what you have to do. And, when people say things to you like, good job, they mean it. When people look at you and say, man, you're really screwing up, or like, you suck right now, right? They're going to be blunt. They're going to tell you, right? There's no pulling punches. I like that. I like the honesty. I like the challenge.
Well, and it's a closer or a really short feedback loop. When you do something that, sends you completely off track, right away. And it's like, hey, it's time to do something different. I think as like kind of a younger junior person, you don't really think about it in terms of like getting feedback really quickly. All you kind of view it as is like getting an ass chewing, and you don't like that. But with the benefit of hindsight, looking back, it's much shorter feedback loops on that. Are there any drawbacks to that?
Yes, I think so. I think sometimes we make snap decisions, right? So we have I don't know if they say it anymore, but the thing when I was a younger Marine was like perception is reality, right? So it was like if I catch you at an off moment and see you, well, I don't know. Like, I mean, let's just take the most basic example. I catch like you're walking to your morning formation, or you just jumped out of your car and you realize as you jumped out of your car, you left your cover in the back seat. And the Marines are known for, you got to wear your cover the second you step outdoors, that cover got to be on your head. And I just catch you at that moment, right? And then I just start, like, where's your cover, Marine? Blah, 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 right? We would make, you know, and this is just a stereotypical example, but the perception is reality. It's like, well, I caught him out of uniform. He's probably not he's a quote unquote shitbird Marine. So that snap decision process where it's an instantaneous feedback, like cause and effect. You do this, you suck, or you do this, you're good, right? I think that, especially nowadays, I think that kind of, if it's done by the wrong person in the wrong circumstances, it kind of, and done too much, I think it kind of leaves a bad taste in the mouth of Marines, and it kind of feels oppressive. I think it kind of feels harassing. I think it kind of feels almost as if, like the unit or the organization is out to get you, right? And people start to feel persecuted.
You use the term nowadays. I guess compare and contrast like what you were just saying. Like obviously everything that you just described is not unique to like this time period that we're living in. Like
Mhm.
you could catch somebody out like in that weird split second that like maybe is not a perfect glimpse of reality, forever in our entire like military history. Like that isn't something that's new. But what is it that's different now? Is it just how people are accepting the feedback and maybe take it too personally?
I think there's a lot of reasons. I mean, this is again, like this is just speculation, but I think that nowadays, back when I was a young Marine,
You
there
were
was.
just about to do it.
Yeah, I know, right? No, I'm
Back in my day.
gonna tell a combat story or say back in Fallujah. What I was gonna say was nowadays Marines have instant access to information, and they can communicate with one another like that, right? So back when I was a young Marine, if a senior Marine came out and blasted you or told you to do something, right, you took their word as gospel because there was, unless you were willing to go to like the base admin center and pull out an order and find a hard copy and like read through, whatever, you took what Marines said as gospel. I think what social media does is it's allowed the spread of information. It's also, in some aspects, been used in the wrong way to kind of like maybe taint the perspective of leadership in the military. So where now, like, if I were to turn around and say to you, Brock, where's your cover at? You'd be like, oh, here he goes again. He's just, that's what you know what I mean? Because my buddy 1-5, he's going through the same thing, right? You know what I mean? So I think what's going on now, and I also think that, generationally, everything is different, right? So there's different every generation of service members has a different set of expectations when they enter the service. So if you were to take it, you go all the way back, guys that joined during the Great Depression were probably happy that they had a roof over their head, a bed to sleep in, and three hot meals each day, right? And they were, anything that came with the military, they were happy with it because the military provided that stability. As you go generationally, and you go all the way through, I think this generation and previous generations have a different standard for, how they handle, how, what their expectations are for treatment, right? So like it's not necessary, I don't think, these in this day and age to just annihilate a Marine on the spot. They don't respond to that. You know what I mean? Like, like the average 18, 19, 20-year-old does not respond to the yelling and the screaming, to the, immediate reverting back to drill instructor mode over like a minor infraction. I think what they want to do is understand the why behind things. So, like, what's the problem? Why are you displeased with me right now? How do I fix it? So you have to explain the why to them a whole lot more now, which is fine. Whereas I think in previous generations, they didn't. But I think there's multiple factors that contribute to that.
While we're talking expectations, you're like literally on the front lines of bringing in this next generation into the Marine Corps. talking to these 18 and 19-year-old kids probably every single day. What are their, aside from this, like that you're talking about of like maybe getting in trouble, understanding the why, what are their expectations going into service? And how was that maybe different than yours or your friends when you were joining?
I think it's reverted back, but in a different way. So I joined, I had no expectation of seeing war. War was like not even something that I even thought about. I picked the Marine Corps because I spent so much time in my principal's office, and she used to keep pictures of kids that had graduated and kids that had gone on to the military on her wall. So if you
Oh
were,
man.
yes, if you were sitting waiting to see her to get your detention or get suspended, you know, there'd be a line of kids. So you'd be waiting for your turn. And I had no choice but to stare at these pictures. And the one thing that I noticed was the Marine Corps their photos seemed to be the most transformative. I don't know what it was, but it was like, so you would see, and I'm not bashing any other branch of the service, but if you would see the Navy kid, it'd be like his senior portrait and then a photo of him from upon his graduation from the Navy. And it looked like the same guy, but now he's in a Navy uniform. If you went all across the services, by the time you got to the Marines, though, whether it was like an overweight kid and then this Marine graduation photo, he was like emaciated and he was like sunburnt. And he had this look on his face that was like half confidence, half fear, half constipation. He's like, you're just like, what are they doing down there? So that's always intrigued me. So I picked the Marine Corps because I thought, you know what? It was like a leap of faith. It was like, I need to get my ass kicked back into like gear. I need something. So like, I'm going to join the Marines. I think during the GWAD or, OEF, OIF, I think a lot of people just join to fight for their country. But I think now that it's peacetime, when I talk to all the kids that, I don't even want to say peacetime, we're in this quasi, like it's kind of like a hybrid environment. But I talk to all these kids now and they say almost uniformly, they use the exact same word too. Their exact same phrase too. They say, I want to be a better version of myself. Right. So you got to think about, recruiters always talk about identifying the need. So like, if I give you a whole bunch of tangible things I want, but they're going to identify like the need behind that. Well, like, why do you want a stable paycheck? Like, why do you want to actually, they have 11 benefit tags and they go through like these key things that appeal to each person. When I speak to them, they just want something different, right? And they're obviously walking into a Marine Corps office because the challenge, the discipline. I ask them, well, what does the word Marine mean to you, right? And they'll all say badass, disciplined, war fighter, right? They say, and it makes sense because that's what we advertise. If you were to look at previous Marine Corps commercials, it literally is a kid getting off the back of an Amtrak on the beach and he's running across the beach with his rifle and he's all cammied up and he's got the force of the Marine Air Ground Task Force, but he's got every single thing in our armory behind him, right? War fighting, right? And then the next thing they go to would be like a clip of the Marine silent drill team twirling a rifle, right? So it's like war fighting and discipline, war fighting and discipline. Like that's what we, advertise to the world. So you want to be a disciplined warrior, and for the kids that don't pick infantry, they still want to be a disciplined warrior. You know what I mean? And they feel like we're going to be able to give them that, regardless of whether they choose, administration or, turning wrenches on, trucks or the many things that exist in our service. I think they're all walking into a Marine office for those two things, right? They want to discipline and they want to be, want to be looked at as like a warrior.
Do you think that messaging, that disciplined warfighter messaging needs to be or will ever need to be changed? As we're talking about the kind of changing generations, people like appealing for different things. I've got several friends that are Navy recruiters, and I've talked to several like senior Navy officers that are kind of at the forefront of a similar position as yourself. And people can't recruit for shit. Like they are really struggling to meet numbers. And my partner is still in the Navy, and they're talking about giving out bonuses because they just can't retain people. And it makes me question or want to ask questions about, are the right things being advertised, and what types of people that's attracting, and I guess this changing kind of regime.
I can only speak about my recruiting station. And because, I don't see I'm not, I worry about what's around me, my sphere of influence, like what I can impact. So I can speak for my recruiting station by saying that there's a system in place now where there's just very detailed screening of every man or woman that tries to join the military in general, right? So, a lot of medical documentation and things like that in order to finally process into the service. So that has slowed things down because the process has gotten a little bit more complex. Right now we don't we're having difficulty meeting the numbers, but we have a whole lot of kids in the pipeline that are just waiting to get, like the letter from the doctor, or the things that they need to go through the military entrance processing and become Marines. So I don't necessarily think we're having a hard time finding kids that want to be Marines. I think right now what we're just trying to deal with is a different processing standard that we've seen in the past. And to be honest with you, I just got done a 3-day mini boot camp that I put on for my recruiting station. So kids across 4 states got into vans. We got drill instructors from San Diego to come out. I'd set up like patrolling lanes. We cammied up. We did all sorts of stuff, right? And and I talk about this on Instagram too, as much as people talk about generationally, the changes, or, like they're soft or whatever. I'm telling you, like, I still see young men and women that have the exact same mindset or want the exact same thing that I wanted 22 years ago, and that probably somebody wanted 42 years ago. So I think we're still producing them, at least for the Marine Corps, because you got to figure too, if you're pursuing the Marines, you're already like, Marine Corps is pretty clear about what we represent. So when you walk into a Marine recruiting office, you're obviously there for a reason. So I don't think that we may not be having the same setup. We have problems. We're having some difficulties, but we may not be incurring the same sort of problems that maybe other branches of service are facing. We're also smaller too.
Well, who knows? Maybe all it would take is the Marine Corps getting up to the times on their tattoo policy, and catching up with the other branches on that.
I I, I think that they're allowed to have sleep tattoos now.
Oh, they are? Oh, okay. I might be a little out of date on that. I know that they were always kind of a little bit stricter on the standards of like what was allowed and what wasn't.
So they weren't at first. So like my drill instructors were just sleeved up. I mean,
Really?
they look like the drummer from Motley Crue, right? um, and I think that obviously was a concern because they were sending, also I think, at that time period, like people used to say like the only people with tattoos are like Marines and sailors and like people from the harder side of life. So I think then people were getting out and it was like, I was a Marine, and it's like, yeah, but you look like Tommy Lee from Motley Crue, like, you know. So I think that there was probably some concern at the organizational level because, like, the Marine Corps, we believe we have a document called Sustaining the Transformation, right? So it's like I take you off the street, make you a Marine, your 4 years of service, I'm going to return you back to the world, set up for success, and you're going to be a better civilian. You're going to be a better human being. You're going to be, you're going to contribute to society. And I think that there was a concern, like we're sending these guys are getting just sleeved up on deployment, and we're sending them back out into the world, and people aren't hiring them. But obviously tattoos are in style now. Everybody has tattoos and whatnot. So I'm pretty sure I should know this, but the Marine Corps has kind of allowed more tattoos, I think. So actually, I know they have. So I think you just can't have them showing in your uniform. But again, check the order. I don't want anybody to say Sergeant Major Reynolds was on this podcast and said like you can get sleep. There's an order, and I'd also argue this: everything that you do to your body is up to whoever's in charge of the service at that time. So if you want to like take, you know what I mean? Hey, 20 years from now, or you could join the Marines now and sleeves could be cool. And then 20 years from now, someone could not like them, or someone, or, society, the trends could change again. You're limiting your service. So why take the chance? You know what I mean? Unless it really means something to you, I would probably advocate not getting a whole bunch of tattoos anywhere, regardless of what the policy is.
Right. It's probably not a bad way to go about it.
No.
You did some writing. I like got such a kick out of this post in classic like senior enlisted fashion. Like I know that you have heard like every complaint in the book. Like you've been living it. You gave those complaints probably like early on, and now like hear them as like excuses or people talking about certain things. People saying like you don't do tough enough training, but your retort to that was like then people complain about being in the field. A complaint was talking about being a quote unquote operator, but then are like preparing like the morning of. And then one of my last favorite ones, like Marines, or I I can't even just put Marines on this because I know that this is service wide. People were being treated like children, but then they can't come to work clean shaven and like in a proper uniform every day. I'm guessing that those are really only the tip of the iceberg on some of the things that probably get your goat going.
I mean, it doesn't get my goat. It's there's like a culture war, right? In some circles or among some segments of individuals, and I think probably in every branch of the service. But basically, it's it's a couple of reasons, right? It's to I think stress the importance of like doing the small things well, right? Because if you can't do the small things well, you can't do the big things, right? And it's also just to point out the fact that like there are young Marines that have like really great insight into things because they see it and they do it every day, right? So like, but people that kind of do the things that I mentioned in that post kind of trivialize the rest of the group, right? Because you got to you got someone saying like this unit sucks, we never do any training, right? And then but then it's like conversely you have someone complaining about we're always in the field, where it's like why do you treat us like they treat us like children? Well, it's like I'm not for treating any Marine like a child, but you're like, hey, I had to remind you to go brush your teeth or shave your face. You know what I mean? That's like I have to do that with my 5-year-old, right? So it was like basically like calling out like, hey, look, I hear you. There's a whole lot of if you want to, you can go on social media and you can find your little niche corner of the internet and just any branch of the service, just find a plethora of like, I hate the service, I hate my unit, I hate this guy, I hate that guy, I hate this, I hate that, you know, and if you were to read those, you would see that like each post contradicts the other. It's like, I hate my, and it would be the same unit. It's like, I hate this unit. We don't do enough realistic training. They don't treat us like children. They treat us like children. And in the very next post, you'll see a bunch of guys acting like children. You know what I mean? Or you say like, if you want to be treated right, you got to remember that you got to do these things. This is what we got to do. This is kind of like the crux of why we exist, right? So it's a reminder, right? And then the other part is, I think a lot of us have violated those things on the post, myself included. So it's not coming from a place of perfection. It's kind of poking fun if that one individual in the unit. It's also like a knowing wink. I think a lot of Marines would read that and go, "I've done that." One of those things, right? I've done that. But yeah, you'd have Marines like walking around, and they're like uniforms and tatters, and you're like, hey man, you can't walk around with that uniform. And it's like, well, how dare you tell me to get a new uniform? Like, I don't have any money. And it's like, but if you went into the room, it's like, man, you've got like more clothes than I do. Like I would say to some of my guys, I'm like, you
Got the
have cooler.
wall of Jordans, you know?
Oh man, like I remember walking in I used to love it because I used to, like we inspect rooms on the week on during the week, and I'd walk into a guy's room and I'd be like, he'd have like a flat screen on the wall, like and all sorts of games. And I used to crack jokes. He'd be like, yo, can I hang out with you this weekend? I'm like, what are you doing this week? And they'd be like, hey, I'm leaving this weekend. I'm like, hey, can I get the keys to your room? I'd love to come here and hang out. I'm like, yo, you have cooler stuff than me, man. Priorities, right? Priorities. Like we're a service that, you make a living on your feet in the Marine infantry, right? So if you're walking around in boots that are like with holes in them, right? Like where are your and you have 50,000 sets of Vans in your room. Like, where are your priorities? You know, where are your priorities? It's just a, honesty check, right? Where are your priorities?
How do you as a leader, you specifically, or maybe you can offer some like guidance, or I want people to like be able to take something away from this. And I know that you have a lot to offer kind of in the leadership realm. How do you as a leader balance hearing those types of things when you want to be open to new ideas, but you also have like, the people that aren't coming shaved every day? Like how do you kind of square those things, maintain the standard, but also be willing to kind of move forward and progress?
I think it's like a large. I mean, I'll answer that, but I think it's like a larger thing, right? So in the Marines, we talk about organizational discipline ties into tactical relevance, right? So like it's like a taboo topic. I think a lot of people because we've kind of a lot of times people will open their mouth and say things that people don't want to hear. But like I've heard guys say, like, it all went downhill when we stopped shining our boots, and all sorts of stuff, right? And that's not what that's. I was for. Nobody explained to me why I had to shave my head, or why I had to have shave my face, or why I had to press my uniform, or why I had to pay attention to these small details. But I was able to see it when I went to combat, right? And it tied into the fact that like if I'm used to looking myself over and looking my Marines over before we came out in the morning and like presented ourselves for work, I was already that much better when I got ready to go on patrol in Fallujah because, where you need to make sure everybody's got the mission essential equipment, right? I was able to see it. No one explained it to me, but I was able to see it just by virtue of my time, right? I think that what I try to do now is I try to explain the why behind, like, hey, here's the reason why you've got to do these things, right? And like, not, and it's not, I don't shake my fist and say, shave your face because I said so. It's like, hey, did you shave your face today? It's like, oh no, sorry, man. Just like, you probably need to go shave your face, man. And like, like, let's talk about what do you do? What time do you wake up at in the morning? Like, explain to me your morning routine. Like, how are you missing this? And then kind of explain like what the why behind it. Because people now look at it like, I don't sweat the small stuff. Like, who cares if I shave my face? Like, I can shoot my weapon. And it's like, well, correct. But if you show me a sloppy unit anywhere, I'm going to show you one that's like not combat effective because you don't get to pick and choose which orders you wish to follow. You know what I'm saying? So if you set a standard where it's like, well, we don't stress that over here. It's like, well, no, you have to stress everything because that's a slippery slope to find yourself on. So like I try to resign myself to the fact that like, hey, there's always going to be people that you're like, hey, come here, man. Like, what's up? I also don't put my opinion into things. Like we have regulations. That's it. Like I have a high and tight haircut, right? I don't make my Marines get a high and tight haircut. Do you have a regulation haircut? It could be a low reg, a medium reg. I could care less. You have a mustache? Great. Is it in regs? Cool. Is your uniform serviceable? Great. I'm not here to be the uniform police. I want to train. You know what I mean? I totally did not stay in the Marine Corps so I could harass people over haircuts and shaves. You know what I mean? And it detracts from the larger mission, which all Marines want to do. And I mean, you're on Instagram, you see it. They want to go train hard. They want to do hard things. They want to deploy. They want to do cool stuff, right? No one wants to be getting harassed over the pizza box in the ladder well or, the condition of the room. You know what I mean? But it's like, you got to do these things in order to do the larger things. So, I mean, I have a lot of, conversations with Marines about it. And I also inspect, I don't do white glove inspections, but, in every unit I've been in, like, yeah, I'll just walk through in the morning. Like, hey, man, pull your blinds. It's much easier for me to say, hey, man, pull your blinds and have the unit sergeant major come down and just start screaming and wreaking havoc in the company. You know what I mean? So it's like just taking care of people, reminding them. It's reminding people to do the right thing.
How can people think about and focus on doing those smaller things? Because in the end, well, I think what you're saying here is that it's really the smaller things that kind of lead to success at the larger level. And you've got people that are, like missing on little tiny things, uniform, shave, whatever, but then like wanting to talk about like talking deployment stuff and shooting and all this other stuff. You mentioned Marines like cleaning their room or pulling the blinds or whatever. I remember this very vivid image. I was in my very first barracks, coming off a watch. It was like 3 in the morning, and I come out and there's like all these lights on, and there's a corporal standing outside this barracks room, and I like kind of like look around and I'm like, what the hell is going on here? Lights are on, whatever, and there are two Marines in there, like all of their entire fucking barracks room is like out in the freaking grass, and they are like hand scrubbing the floor of their barracks room. And I'm like, yo, what's going on here? Like it's literally 3 in the morning, and he's like, failed room inspection. And I was just like, oh, okay. In that moment, I was like, well, I joined the right branch. Um, but later on, I was like, man, it's hard for me to get my arms around that. But I think that speaks to the small stuff. So can you kind of unpack that, like doing the small things to do the big things?
Yeah, I mean, to speak about that specifically, so that ties into a question that was asked previously, right? So you saw, I guess they failed inspection, so someone made them get on their hands and knees and do all sorts of crazy stuff to their room, right? And like, so when I was saying like nowadays, someone would pull out their phone, right, and take a video of these two Marines being forced to, scrub, like I envision Forrest Gump, like scrubbing with their toothbrush, right? And then automatically, like that goes to the peanut gallery where it's like, that's ridiculous. You know what I mean? Like that's oppressive. That's this, that's that, right? And at the root of it all, it is, right? So what's the problem? They didn't clean a room, right? So, you clean your room. Hey, you failed. I'll be back and you got 2 hours. I'll be back in 2 hours, right? The way that I think that you stress these things is like, hey, I'm not making you get on your hands and knees and clean this room. I'm going to walk by and say, here's the mission. The mission was to clean your room, right? You failed. You obviously disregarded everything I said. So, the company's gone. You guys I'm not going to keep you all night. You got 2 hours. When you're done, let me know. I'll be back. And if they pass it, they pass it. And, hopefully they know. I think what people are counting on is that leadership now is so distracted, or people are so distracted that you'll forget to come back or you won't follow up with them. So like when you demonstrate that you'll follow up, it's a real simple conversation. Hey, why didn't you get a haircut? And they're expecting you to just go like, oh, I got to go, get away from me. Right. Don't ever do that again. Right. If you were to say to someone, hey, at lunch, go grab a haircut and come back to my office. I just want to make sure you got it done. They're going to know you're going to follow up. They have to follow these orders. Right. So you don't like yelling and screaming. That's great. But they're used to that. That's the first thing we indoctrinate Marines in. Is the first thing they do when they set up the bus is getting yelled at, right? So every Marine has this thing inside of them now where you start screaming, they just go catatonic because that's how they got through boot camp. That's they learned that, right? So you're going to yell and scream. This kid's going catatonic. He's just going to get through. He's going to revert back to recruit mode. He's not going to be listening. If you just look at a kid and say, "You can get a haircut. Do me a favor, man. Go to the base barber at lunchtime and just hey, get that squared away and then come back and let me know that you got it done." That's simple. And then they know the next week he's going to check. He's going to make me come back. He's not going to let this go. You know what I mean? So it's like problem solved. You just got to demonstrate consistency, right? Like I will follow up, for all things. I'm not going to let this slide. I'm not going to walk away. I'm not going to forget about it. I'm not going to yell and scream. I'm not going to harass you. I'm going to give you a directive. Go get a haircut. Let me know when you get it done. I'd like to see it. Clean your room. You failed. I'll be back in a little bit. I asked you to do something. You're not getting out of it. It's on you to make sure that, you want to go, you got other things you need to do. It's on you to get it done. Mission type orders.
How do you take that when there's nobody breathing down your neck? We're talking about this in the instance of kind of a junior to like senior person, but at a certain point, when you're in, you always have a boss, but the breathing down the neck, I think, kind of lowers over time, and even outside the service, like you don't have somebody kind of like directly holding you accountable. How do you like make sure that you're showing up every day to do those small things like you talked about with your family, spending time with them, those little like hour after dinner or whatever, working on homework together, whatever it is. How do you continue to show up for small things when you don't have that accountability?
Are you talking about? I mean, my wife is my accountability. To be honest with you, so people see me and I think they see my position in the Marine Corps and think that like I probably run my household. It's the exact opposite. All right, my wife will not allow me. Okay, and this is a good thing, right? My wife will not allow me to not be a present father, right? So I can honestly say, like, I don't know how to not be present because my wife, I mean, like literally, like, here, change the diaper. You know what I mean? Here, you know what I mean? And I'm not saying this in a bad way. Like, I get home and but she will not allow me to not be present. She will not allow me to not participate. You know what I mean? She will continue. Like I coached my daughter's 6-year-old girls soccer team. I've never once played soccer. I know nothing about soccer. Okay.
At
But
that level, it's just showing up.
right. I mean, that's another story in of itself because I'm a Marine, right? So I consulted other Marines. My CO at the time had played soccer, had coached soccer. So he gave me like drills and stuff. So I came with a schedule, right?
Oh
Where
man.
we
They're
started
6 years old. They're like, run, run, run.
right. I started off with like dynamic warm-ups and it was like yeah. So basically what it whittled down to was like maybe 2 or 3 activities that I could keep them, but sometimes I think it helps for me personally. I've benefited from a wife that expects and rightfully so and demands that, like when I step inside, when I cross that threshold to the door, right? I'm there to be a father to my kids, whether it's involved in their activities, whether it's take them to the park, you know what I mean? And I think sometimes she can maybe sense if work is getting to me or something like that, and she'll force me out of that funk to say like, hey, do this, do that. So it's very much a 50-50 split in my house with my wife and the kids, like so I had the virtue of being married to someone who will not tolerate and will not allow me to not be a present father to my kids. So I don't know what that's like. You know what I mean? The other part is I missed the birth of my daughter because I was in Afghanistan. Um, and I had to wait 5 months to see her. And that was the slowest 5 months I've ever experienced, right? Because you're like, this is my first child, and you just like want to hold her, you want to do whatever. So for me, I when my son was born, he's 4 years younger than my daughter, 5 years younger than my daughter. I was present, and I wanted to make sure that I never missed a moment of his development, never missed a milestone, because I had missed so much with my daughter. So I don't know how people cannot be present in their family when they go home. I mean, but that's my personal story about my role in the house. That's how I found balance. I found a wife that you said, how do you take away someone that doesn't breathe? My wife is my boss when I come home. You know what I mean? In a good way, right?
Speaks to the value of finding a good partner.
Yeah.
Uh, on the soccer field, I'm just like envisioning the parents like, why did we have a Marine coach the soccer team? And you've got the girls out there like army crawling down the field, like
I thought about it because some of them, I had a hard time listening and staying on task. But I obviously I thought, to be honest with you, like it's funny, right? Because you're at work calling the shots all day long, and you get home and a 6-year-old basically tells you, like, yeah, whatever, man, get lost. I'm not doing that. So it's funny, right? It puts you in your place.
yeah, reminds you reminds you who's in charge.
There's a world outside of the military.
There really is.
Yep.
While we were going to kind of like talk about the R word, I think towards the end of the conversation, but I think that this is like a good time to talk about it. Retirement, talking a lot about the value of family, what that does for you. You've been in 22 years, if I've got that right. Are you thinking about it? What what's going through your mind? What do you think about life after the service, if there is one? I had joked with you before we started recording about, I know the once a Marine, always a Marine, so you don't got to give me that. But yeah, what are you thinking about when it comes to that?
I think that as you get older, as you do a lot of time in the military, and each person hits their finish line sooner or later than others. But I think it all stems around the fact, for me or guys with family, I think it all centers around family. But I had this, so actually my commanding officer asked me like last year, talking about retirement and whatnot. And I said, to me, I've always thought about retirement is that someday, if I ever think about, if being present at my son's t-ball game, right, becomes more of a priority and eats at me more than going on a deployment or, my role as a Marine, then that's probably time for me to call it quits. And now that may sound terrible, like your son's t-ball game is not a priority. No, it is a priority to me. But at some point, the pull and the draw, right? It's like a game of tug of war, right? So like right now, so you find yourself as you get a family in the Marine Corps, right? You got the Marine Corps on one side, your family on the other, and they're pulling on that rope, right? And you've got that mark in the center to determine the winner, right? And whichever one pulls it right across the line is the winner, right? So like right now in my life, that rope's being pulled and it's taut, right? Nothing's given, right? At some point, the family is going to pull it across the way, and when my family does, when it becomes, the overwhelming need, and my family situation requires it, then it's time for me to go. But right now, family and work are balanced, right? Because my family situation is good. My family situation is such. But I think that, at some point, guys will feel like, hey, you know what? I want to coach T-ball. I don't want to go on a mule. You know what I mean? And it's like, hey, that's good on you, man. You great, thank you for your service. You had a great career. It's time for you to go. Much respect. But until you get to that point, I'm not at that point yet. I think that someday soon I will be. That's my thoughts on when it's time to retire. I tell people too that are getting out, like young Marines, my metric for that is, because I deal with primarily infantry. I said, let me ask you a question, because I was in this position myself. I said, so you're going to get out? And they say yes. And I said, so put yourself in this situation. It's a year from now. You're in college. You look on this TV screen and see the Marine Corps has just gone and done some like big named operation. And you look at it and you see it's your unit. I said, if you don't, will you feel a tremendous amount of like, oh, I wish I was there. Oh. If they answer yes, I said, maybe you might want to rethink about getting out, right? Because I was in that situation, right? But if you could look at it and say, like, salute, boys, like, semper fi, you know what I mean? I'll start write, you know what I mean? Like, hey, write your letters, you know what I mean? Hoorah, and go about your day, then this is the right decision, because what I don't want at the end of it all is that if you don't take either one of these, retirement, getting out, whatever, if you don't take this situation seriously, right? And like, you talked about it before we started recording, and I did too. If it's just a spur of the moment thing with like no thought, and it's like, I'm out, and you just like walk and the door closes behind you, a lot of people find themselves with a tremendous amount of regret. So when it is your time, make sure it's your time. You know what I mean? Don't get out based on emotion. Don't get out or don't retire based on, present situation. Like, oh, this unit stinks, or I've got, a bad relationship with this one person. I'm leaving, because you're going to set yourself up for shoulda, coulda, woulda. You know what I mean? Regret. Where could I be now? Make sure that when it's your time to go, you're at peace with that decision.
Do you think that there are people that you paint this picture of like this rope and it's, staying in, and do you think that the staying in, the marine end of the rope, is ever driven by achievements, or like not real, like, I don't want to say not real, but like they're searching for some validation from the service that maybe just like hasn't quite happened yet?
Are you talking about like a stereotypical careerist? Like, I
Yeah,
want to I want to move up the ladder and I'll sacrifice everything else just to kind of get up the ladder. Or
a little bit of that. A little bit of that. A little bit of this concept that I've kind of really come to be fascinated with, and we touched on it a little bit earlier about how there is always going to be somebody that's like done more. It's like the back in my Navy thing or whatever, or back in my Marine Corps. The day that you came in, everything changed. I talk to some people that kind of speak about this like achievement thing, that there's going to be some day that have done something and then it will finally mean something.
right.
Have you ever thought about that, or do you talk to people about that?
I think that if you ever try to plan out your moves in the military, especially the Marine Corps, it's a fool's errand. And I think that you will find yourself, you're never going to get exactly what you want. Right. So you have to step into the situation being ready for anything. So, like, I guess to your point is like, if I were to like, hey, if I just get this one thing, then I'll be good. Well, that's kind of like a fool's errand, because, chances are you won't get exactly what you're looking for. So if you're, like, hey, I'll stay until I make sergeant major. Well, why do you want to be a sergeant major? Well, because I want to be a battalion sergeant major of an infantry battalion. Well, you'll get sergeant major, but you'll go on recruiting. You know what I mean? So it's like, I would say you've got to take a step back and start looking at it like, do you want to serve? Right? Because I don't believe in condition based service, meaning like, if you sign the contract, if you put your name in the hat for promotion, you've got to be able and willing to take whatever comes out of that. Right. So, but if it's like, well, this doesn't quite line up with my goals, when it's like, well, then you should never have put your name on the dotted line, because it's a contract. Right. So I guess my thought to that would be, I think it's a fool's errand to maybe ignore your personal life or ignore a situation outside of the military if you're just chasing one thing, right? Because that one thing isn't just one thing. I want to be like I just said example, I want to be a sergeant major. Well, why? Because I want to lead a battalion. Okay. Well, you understand that you may get promoted to that rank and go somewhere so far away from a battalion. How will you feel then? Will you still be with it? You still going to be down for the cause? You're still going to want to do your job? How will you feel if you don't get exactly what you're looking for? Think about that. You know what I mean? That's kind of like my thought on that, because I mean, there are people that, and they're just in a tremendous cycle of disappointment because they put their eggs in one basket. Here's what I want, and it's like, well, that's, really hard to come by in the military to get the perfect situation every single time. So if you're not with it, you're not committed, you're not willing to take whatever they give you, and do a good job, and do everything you're supposed to do, then you probably shouldn't try to pursue that.
It's clear to me just by the things that you say that you weren't driven by that kind of sense of accomplishment, and you're getting that sense of validation from your service just by just being there. Is being a Marine all the validation to you personally that you felt like you needed?
Yeah,
Or in what way has the Marine Corps fulfilled that basket for you?
because this has been the purest thing that I've ever done. Like I said, I walked into the Marine Corps like I was late. I had wasn't really no academic achievement. I had quit playing sports, and this was something where I stepped in at the ground floor, and they made me earn everything. Right, and then that whole, like I said before, like looking at people that you put up on a pedestal, like Staff. I post about people like this, and I would say some names, but it's like Staff Sergeant Fowler, Gunny Dagenhart, like all these people. And I don't know anything about their personal life. I don't know who they were outside of the uniform. I know, to me, as a 19-year-old, impressionable young man, those people and who had chosen the Marine Corps, those people stood out to me as the metric for everything I wanted to be. And so for me, just to and the Marine Corps in general, when I think Marine, I think of just no excuses, right? You've devoted your life to something where there's no excuses, results, hardship, challenges, all these things. So for me, being a Marine is enough to say that I was a Marine. I was a Marine successfully. You know what I mean? I had an honorable service. Like, to me, means everything in the world. So I am happy with just being a Marine, right? And that's because at the end of the day, when you get out of the Marine Corps, or you get out of the service in general, and you sit down at the VFW, I don't think anybody cares what level you served at. You know what I mean? Like, when I sit down and I say I was a sergeant major, nobody's going to look at me and say, like, well, were you like a division sergeant major? Were you a regimental? You're just a sergeant major, right? What's your story? You sit around with a bunch of guys or girls and you tell stories, right? That's what your service entails. So to me, I've always been just happy with being a Marine. And like, to this day, I still remember this one thing. When I went to Paris Island, it's like it blazed in my head. When you're standing on the yellow footprints, I know this sounds corny. I know this sounds taboo. And I know, like, any Marine that's currently in the service right now is going to, like, roll their eyes. But I remember everybody was screaming at me, right? And there was a sign right above the door when you walk in, and it says, "Through these portals, past prospects for America's finest fighting force," right? Everybody there that I had seen when I got off the bus, the drill instructors, whoever, even the person that issued us our clothes, right? Who at the time was like 110-pound female, right? Like, literally, she was like 110 pounds. She was, or not even, like, probably 90 pounds. She was tiny, right? She was walking on top of a table, throwing trousers at us, right? Based upon our size, like, like, just like issuing out our clothes. I was staring at her and she said, "Keep eyeballing me and I'll kick your goddamn head off your head off your shoulders," right? And I sat there and said, "Oh my God, even this 90-pound female is a badass," right? And I was like, everybody here is such a badass, right? And to me, that first impression of correctness, of just being just military professionalism, almost to the point of being like a fanatic, right? Like, everything about them is correct, has always stood out to me as being a hallmark of Marine. And I'm proud to just say that I was a Marine.
I think that that's super inspiring and insightful of you to kind of like notice it for even not even being out and living in kind of like a different status but you're exactly right. Anytime that service comes up to, at least in my experience, nobody cares. Or it's not nobody cares. They care, but anything that you accomplish, not only does it not mean anything to them, just your service is enough.
Right.
And I think more people need to hear that and take it to heart.
It's on you, right? Like, the only people that are haunted by this is the individual. So, like, I say to guys all the time, like, never have a shoulda, coulda, woulda story, right? Because, like, that's always, how it works in the military, or maybe the Marine Corps. The second someone says, "Well, I would have, or I could have, or I should have," whatever they're about to say next, you go like, yeah, right? Because it's like, "Well, I was gonna be a chief, but my unit," it's like, what really happened, right? So I feel like the only people that really care about what they did in the service are people that maybe fell short, they're haunted by something, they're troubled by something, or they acted in a way that they now regret later on. So, like, that's the only thing that I would say, like, getting out of the service, just make sure that you have no regrets, right? Like, if you're a kid in a unit right now and you may not like your unit, or you may feel like, what's the point? Or that we have this saying in the Marines, like, "Drop my pack," right? And Marines will say, like, "Well, I was motivated, and then this guy showed up, so I decided, like, what's the point? I dropped my pack." You will regret that once you leave 5, 10 years. Because I get messages from people that I served with 15, 20 years ago that are, "Hey, I'm sorry for being such a blah 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 blah, 20 years ago." And you're like, "Bro, I forgot all about you." He didn't forget. He thinks about it almost every day, right? Because because life, he's matured, right? I would hate to be that person. So if you can stand to change that, if there's the one thing I could tell you before you leave the service, like, give everything you have so that you don't walk out the door and are hit with this tremendous amount of guilt or regret or embarrassment 5 years down the line when your brain matures, or you put some time and perspective in between yourself and the service. So you're not haunted by these memories of like, hey, the one time I raised my hand and swore that I would be, accountable for myself. I would accomplish the mission and I would do whatever, the Department of Defense or, the United States of America asked me to do. I reneged on that commitment.
That's not something that's something that'll keep you up at night. I can promise anybody that. If they have to think about having not left it all on the table. I have one last kind of subject I'd love to discuss with you. You have, if I've got this written down here right, 8 deployments across almost every corner of the globe. It looks like and over, like I said, 22 years. And we're not here to rehash war stories or anything like that. But I want to hear from you how you've seen the landscape of war change in the last 20 years throughout your experiences and maybe what you think the next 20 might look like.
I don't know. I think that I had a moment where I was in an infantry battalion. It was 2016, and we went to Camp Pendleton, and they were running through scenarios. It was basically like a counterinsurgency thing, and they had Afghan role players there, and they were going through a scenario with like a suicide bomber. And I was now their first sergeant, so like an E8, right? And I was watching the training from a rooftop, and it was like deja vu, right? It hit me, and I was like, this is kind of like a weird thing, right? So like imagine a Vietnam veteran watching his Marines prepare to go back or prepare for Vietnam type scenarios 20 years after he did it, right? So I thought it was like a deja vu moment. I don't know. I think that if you were to look at warfare, I think that the only thing that we absolutely know to be true is that we have to be prepared for anything, right? So like, we had a Cold War where we, in the 80s and whatnot, where we prepared for a war against a major, European land force, and we ended up fighting a counterinsurgency in the desert, right? So I think what we need to do, I don't really know what the future of warfare holds. What I do know though is that I think we need to capture everything that has transpired in the last 20 years. We need to pass down what's relevant. We need to remember what's relevant. We need to incorporate that into our training so that we are ready for whatever comes our way. It could be a low grade insurgency. It could be a lot of things. My biggest concern as like a enlisted guy in the Marine Corps is not necessarily where we're going, but how to make sure that the people that we're going with are ready. You know what I mean? Because no matter where we're at, it's still going to be a human being. It's going to be a young Marine behind that rifle, behind that machine gun. If you strip it down to that, I think that a lot of the stuff that we're doing, if we just continue to work on the basics that we have, I think that no matter what campaign we go to, I mean, obviously there's going to be some things, but it's a good blueprint and a good baseline for success. And that's kind of what I work. That's kind of what I think about on a daily basis. I read the news. I try to stay abreast of current threats and whatnot. But at the end of the day, whether it's this country or that country, what does that mean on Monday morning when I wake up and I face my rifle squad? And I got to decide how we're going to train that day. Are we doing anything differently? We're still going to practice patrolling. We're still going to PT. We're still going to demonstrate, shoot with our weapons and try to get weapons proficiency. So all the basics, that's what I want to focus on. The mechanics, I don't know. I think, information operations, obviously will be different. I mean, right now you can get up to the minute, or not up to the minute, but you can see quite a few things coming out of the Ukraine once it started, like videos from all sides and stuff like that. So I think maybe information, the spread of information, what gets out, digital signatures and things like that. I think that's probably going to be the most pressing, immediate difference, I think, with warfare, especially if you're fighting in like a counterinsurgency, because information is probably the most important thing. The message getting out, the actions of the troops, and how it's perceived by the people that you're trying to win over.
That's how I know you're a good podcast guest. You take a really complex question and just whittle it down into the most simple thing. So I like that answer. Keep training like we have been. Pass on the good stuff. Throw out the bad. Continue to evolve and grow.
Like I said, man, I don't want to pontificate on. There's plenty of people that really this is like their bread and butter. I would never get into it, because at the end of the day, here's what you need me to do. You need me to get a unit of young men and women physically and mentally ready for the rigors of combat. Whether it's here, there, anywhere else. It's going to be hard. It's going to be physically taxing, and you need to be able to shoot your weapon well. You need to be able to go from point A to point B without falling out, and you need to be, so you got to know you got to know how to do these things. So I mean, that's kind of how I've always approached my duties. That's what it is. And Sergeant Major Black had I think he said this. He's a Sergeant Major of the Marine Corps. He said this a while ago. He talked about the invasion of Iraq, and he said in 2003 the Marine Corps invaded Iraq, and we were in Baghdad, very very quickly. Right. He said, and at the time, very few Marines had any combat experience. Right. He said, so how does a unit with little to no combat experience achieve such great success on the battlefield? Now, people will turn around and say, well, the Iraqi army wasn't that good, or whatever. The answer was discipline and training, small unit discipline and training. Right. So they had very little combat experience. They were able to compensate for that, learn on the fly because they had a lot of training and they were disciplined units. And to me, I wrote that down, and that's been something that I've kept with me all the time. When I say discipline, I don't mean yelling and screaming at Marines and making them scrub floors with toothbrushes. I mean discipline. I look at you and say, Brock, I need you to, face this way and cover this sector of fire. I can walk away, go get a cup of coffee, smoke a cigarette, come back, and I know you're still going to be there. You're not going to be asleep. You're not going to walk away. You're gonna stay there until I tell you to, we need to do something else. That's what I mean by discipline unit.
One final thought. What is the one thing that current or former service members need to hear that they haven't heard?
Check the ego, right? So you raised your hand, you walked into a recruiting office, you raised your hand, and you've gone and you swore to, uphold and defend, right? So you do all these things, right? You cannot step back into society with a chip on your shoulder, looking at everybody saying oh, you don't know what I've seen or what the point is, they're not supposed to. That's the beauty of the military. You volunteer. We have a segment of the population that raises their hand and goes and experiences hardships or goes and sees things in the world to protect our country, so that everybody else can go about their day. Right. So like that person, that soccer mom that's never left her bubble, that is, her routine consists of workout in the morning and Starbucks later on. That's what we exist to defend. Right. The fact that she has a bubble, you should be happy that she has a bubble. Right. So when you should look at that and say, job well done. That's why the military exists. These people live, like a pampered, comforted life. So when you interact with these people, get rid of the chip on your shoulder. They don't owe you anything. Right. They don't owe you. They don't, oh, thank you for your service. You know what I mean? It's like, be humble. I guess that's what I would say, because I think there's what I don't like is there's like a culture where very much like thank me for my service type stuff. Right. And it's like, it's supposed to be selfless. You don't want to step back into the world and beat your chest and, I fought for your right to, it's like, hey man, you don't need to remind the whole world that, you were a rifleman and whatnot, right? Like they're allowed to be ignorant to the military to a degree. You know what I'm saying?
And to use a phrase that you used earlier, it's not condition based service.
Right.
I'm going to steal that. I like that.
I mean, you're not owed to live. Like it's like when you step out of the military and you step back into the real world, understand you're stepping into time does not stop because you left. So like you're not owed. I don't know, like the world's not going to, stop and bend down and kiss the ring just because you were a Marine or because you were a sailor or because you were an airman, like you've got to figure out how to, leverage your service to make yourself relevant now in a new world, right? The civilian world, right? So like you can cry, you can be very upset about the fact, like, woe is me or whatever, or you can figure out a way to leverage your service, leverage your experiences into something that's going to make you marketable or make you successful in the civilian world. But at the end of the day, like the world's not stopping for you.
I'm excited to see when it comes time for you to get out. I'm excited to see how you leverage your service into bigger and better things. But for now, I'm sleeping much better at night knowing you're in the position that you're in. Don, Sergeant Major Reynolds, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Brock.
Thanks so much for tuning in today. Your listenership helps me better educate people like you and the rest of our nation's military, both past and present, on building a successful life outside of military service. If you're looking for more ways the top vets are leading more effective lifestyles, building businesses, and using the resources designed specifically for you, press here for a selection of some of the best clips. Be sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel to stay up to date, and I will be talking with you soon.